They told me my barrier was an eyesore. They changed their tune when the river tried to take their homes. I didn't build it for their approval. I built it for my family, for the life we'd made on this small plot of land. They didn't study the weather charts like I did. They never noticed the stream behind our houses swelling with every downpour. They never woke to the gurgling sound of water eating away at the edge of their property. I did. So I built the barrier. Simple, reinforced concrete, standing a foot taller than any fence regulation. It followed the tree line, a silent, gray guardian. 3 weekends of backbreaking labor left me sore, my hands raw. But when it was done, it wasn't just a wall. It was the line between foresight and willful blindness. The first to comment was Arthur, the HOA chairman. He was walking his poodle mix one evening. Planning for an invasion, David? He joked, that condescending grin plastered on his face. Just making sure the stream stays in its place during the next big storm, I said, wiping grime from my forehead. He chuckled. A bit dramatic, don't you think? The Weather Service isn't exactly forecasting a hurricane for our cul-de-sac. I didn't bother arguing. You can't explain a rising water table to a man who's never had wet floorboards. You can't argue with water. It doesn't care about your rules. By the end of the week, the neighborhood rumor mill was churning. Sarah, the board secretary, posted a blurry picture of my wall from her window online. Unsanctioned construction. An eyesore. Thoughts. Anonymous complaints appeared under my door. Then came the formal letter, heavy paper, official seal. It cited unauthorized hardscaping, a violation of some bylaw, and gave me 2 weeks to dismantle it or face daily fines. I read it on my porch, the morning sun catching the dew on the concrete. A familiar tension gripped my jaw, a relic from my service days when orders came from far away from the reality on the ground. They wanted it gone, but they'd never stood in their basement with water seeping over their ankles. My neighbor, Leo, waved from his yard. He was one of the few not beholden to the HOA's every whim. He nodded at the barrier. For the flooding? Yeah. Smart, he said, shaking his head. They're not going to like it. They already don't. That night, I pulled out my files. Service records, engineering documents, old flood maps, FEMA risk assessments I'd printed months ago. I compiled it all into a formal, measured response. I wasn't building a structure. I was installing a flood mitigation system as per federal guidelines. I mailed it certified. 2 days later, Arthur was on my porch, coffee in hand, a strained smile on his face. David, got your packet. He shifted his weight. Look, I understand. Truly. But this is about community cohesion, visual harmony. We can't have everyone building their own private levees, can we? Is that what you see? I asked, gesturing to the wall. A levee? He gave a weak laugh. It's a bit aggressive, sends the wrong message. I leaned in. The only message I'm sending is that I'm done waiting for you to address the drainage problems you've neglected. If the board won't act, I will. His smile vanished. You're being difficult. No, I said. I'm being safe. He left, his coffee unfinished. I kept working. Every evening, I mixed concrete, set reinforcement, until my skin was cracked and dry. Most neighbors avoided me, but not Leo. He brought over extra bags of gravel one Saturday and helped me finish the last section. The final sealant went down the night the new storm was predicted, a major atmospheric river event. The forecasters were alarmed. I called it the final exam. I stood in the yard, a flashlight beam cutting through the rain, watching it sheet off the smooth surface. For the first time in this neighborhood of conformity, I felt prepared. I knew they still despised it, but I also knew they'd think of it when the water rose. 3 days after the storm passed, my wall stood firm, a steadfast protector in the mud. The second letter arrived, hand-delivered in a stiff envelope. Notice of continued violation. Final warning before penalties. They accused me of ignoring communications, creating visual disharmony, and, this was new, posing a liability risk. They cited a newly amended bylaw I was sure nobody had voted on. That was their way. Change the game while you're still learning the rules. They relied on people being too worn down to challenge them. I wasn't that person anymore. Leo came by with his wheelbarrow. They sent another friendly reminder? I held up the letter. They're getting serious. You taking it down? I didn't answer immediately. I reached for a binder and handed it to him. It held city codes, FEMA advisories, and photos from my service, one of a temporary flood barrier we built overseas. He leafed through it quietly. You know what you're up against, he stated. I've always known, I replied. They just don't want to be reminded of what they've chosen to ignore. That afternoon, I sent another certified letter. I detailed their failure to maintain community drains, included photos of standing water from their recent beautification projects that paved over natural runoff channels. I knew it was futile. It wasn't about logic. It was about authority, and I had challenged theirs. The following week, Sarah approached me at the mailboxes, her smile as sharp as her perfume. David, just a heads up. The board is exploring legal options. Legal options? I asked. We'd like to avoid court, of course. But if you remain non-compliant, you mean if I continue to safeguard my property? I corrected. She gave a thin, humorless laugh. I believe you've made your stance quite clear. Her eyes turned cold. The regulations apply to everyone, David. Even you. I didn't say what I was thinking. The problem isn't that the rules apply to everyone. It's that they were written to protect only a few. That night, I inspected the wall. The concrete had cured to a smooth, pale finish. I checked the seams, ran a hand along the top, and looked at the creek. It was high, muddy, and angry. Another storm was coming. The National Weather Service had issued a flash flood watch, but the HOA had sent nothing. No warning, no advice. Instead, I saw Arthur on his ladder, hanging decorations for a neighborhood garden tour. A performance, a blatant denial of the truth. It was maddening. The day before the rain returned, I got an envelope from their attorney. A cease and desist. I laughed, a hollow sound on my quiet porch. They accused me of damaging common property, erecting an unapproved installation, and, most absurdly, causing widespread anxiety. The only unease came from the shared, unspoken knowledge that when the water returned, the HOA had done nothing. But I had. Preparation isn't paranoia. It's a promise to those you protect. The scent of wet soil and cement always brought memories rushing back. Distant, loud, and heavy. After the legal threat, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear of a lawsuit, but because the pressure of being misunderstood and threatened echoed feelings I'd worked hard to leave behind. Places where people didn't listen until it was too late. I sat in the garage with an old, worn album. Not the one for guests. This one was tucked away. The first photo was from my engineering corps days, sandbags stacked high behind us. We were exhausted but proud. We'd held the line. Another page, a volunteer deployment after a hurricane. The smell of decay and fuel. The silence after the wind died. Then, a memory from overseas, a makeshift barrier protecting a field hospital. It held long enough for an evacuation. I came home with those lessons etched into me. But people here saw a quiet retiree who mowed his lawn. They didn't understand that water doesn't negotiate. The scent of wet soil and cement always brought memories rushing back. Distant, loud, and heavy. After the legal threat, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear of a lawsuit, but because the pressure of being misunderstood and threatened echoed feelings I'd worked hard to leave behind. Places where people didn't listen until it was too late. I sat in the garage with an old, worn album. Not the one for guests. This one was tucked away. The first photo was from my engineering corps days, sandbags stacked high behind us. We were exhausted but proud. We'd held the line. Another page, a volunteer deployment after a hurricane. The smell of decay and fuel. The silence after the wind died. Then, a memory from overseas, a makeshift barrier protecting a field hospital. It held long enough for an evacuation. I came home with those lessons etched into me. But people here saw a quiet retiree who mowed his lawn. They didn't understand that water doesn't negotiate. I pulled out an old canvas bag from a corner. Manuals, weather radios, a folder labeled Emergency Flood Protocols. I knew them by heart. Now I was living them. The rain was 2 days out, but the creek was already stirring. I checked the wall. No cracks. The French drains were clear. I'd also installed a backup pump. This wasn't for show. It was for survival. They could sue me, but they couldn't stop what was coming. I filed a report with the city that day, not to fight, but to have a record. I sent images of the HOA's paved-over drainage ditches, highlighting the risk. I didn't expect a reply, but I needed it documented. Meanwhile, the HOA was doubling down. A flyer appeared on the community board. Emergency meeting, unauthorized constructions, and legal action. Attendance mandatory. I knew the target. The clubhouse was all fake columns and lemon-scented cleaner. I took a seat in the back. Arthur, Sarah, and the treasurer, Phil, sat at the front with their branded mugs. Sarah started in her saccharine tone. Neighbors were facing a serious breach of our community standards. One homeowner has built an unapproved fortification. Arthur leaned in. We cannot let individual actions risk our community's appearance and liability. If David's wall fails or redirects water, we're all in danger. It's irresponsible. People turned to stare. I stood. My wall won't fail, I said calm. Yours might. The room gasped. Excuse me? Arthur snapped. I provided flood maps, engineering data, and warnings 2 years ago. You paved over natural drainage. You ignored the risks. My wall exists because I know what's coming. I've seen what happens when people wait. Sarah frowned. There's no official flood warning. The state downgraded this zone years ago. We've had 2 so-called 100-year storms since then, I countered. I looked around the room. This isn't about overreacting. It's about being ready. You can mock me now. But when the water comes, you'll wish you had listened. The room fell silent. No applause, but no laughter either. I walked out. That night, thunderheads gathered on the horizon. My bones knew what it meant. Every part of me that had ever filled a sandbag or helped someone to safety knew. I didn't need their permission. I had certainty. The irony was carved into the land itself. Before I ever mixed concrete, the HOA had its beautification project. Arthur presented it with drone shots and upbeat music. Revitalizing our pathways, he called it. Replacing old gravel drainage with decorative brick walkways. It was a hydrological disaster, and it passed unanimously. They buried functional storm channels under compacted soil and pretty bricks, calling it the Serenity Walk. Serenity? They'd plugged the neighborhood's arteries. I asked if they'd consulted an engineer. Sarah said the landscaper was an artist and drainage wasn't a priority. I watched them bury years of natural water flow under red brick. I asked the foreman about the slope. He looked blank. I should have walked away then. When they laid the last brick, Arthur and Sarah applauded. They'd built a monument to ignorance. After every rain, I saw the consequences. New puddles, soggier ground, the creek rising faster. I documented it all. Photos, water flow maps, hidden gauges. The water had nowhere to go. One morning after a drizzle, I inspected the path. I lifted a brick near a dip. Underneath was solid, waterlogged clay. A mosquito breeding ground. When I showed Arthur the pictures, he smirked. David, you need a hobby. This is my hobby, I replied. Preventing disasters. He laughed. Then maybe join the board instead of fighting it. I'd had my fill of committees that voted against evidence. The final sign came 2 weeks before the big flood. Water was seeping under my fence, not from the creek, but from the community path. A slow, constant weep. My drains were working, but they weren't designed to handle the redirected runoff from the entire street. I filed another report. No response. Then a landscaping crew arrived, not to fix the drainage, but to install decorative solar lamps. I watched from my porch, stunned. Leo came over. "They're putting makeup on a patient in critical condition," he muttered. "Worse," I said. "They're painting a target on our backs." "How?" "If the water comes fast, it won't soak in. It'll race across these paved paths, over the clay, right into our yards." He looked at the path. "And where does it end up?" "Here," I said. That night, I created a full schematic. I mapped every redirected flow, every obstruction. The data didn't lie. The HOA hadn't just neglected drainage. They'd engineered a funnel pointing at the lowest homes, including mine. I tried one last time. I wrote a letter to every homeowner on the street. I included my schematic, my photos, my predictions. I delivered them myself at dusk. Some thanked me quietly. Others ignored it. One, a board member named Greg, tore it up and tossed the pieces on my lawn. I picked them up the next morning, the ink smeared from the wet grass. The rain was coming. The air smelled of metal. And that pretty, brick path was a carefully laid trap. The first warning was in the ground, a faint tremor through my boots. The earth was supersaturated. The creek was already high and loud, though the main event hadn't started. The air was thick and still, heavy like a wet blanket. I'd felt this before. Something significant was coming. I walked my property line. The wall was sound. The drains were clear. The slope I'd graded was channeling water away. Everything was holding. But I wasn't the one in danger. That morning, the official bulletin came. A Category 4 atmospheric river. 8 to 14 inches of rain. Flash flood watches for surrounding counties, but not ours, because the HOA had never requested updated flood maps. We were still listed as minimal risk. A joke. By noon, I'd printed my own neighborhood alert. I included the Weather Service maps and my elevation analysis, showing the vulnerable homes. At the bottom, in bold, "If you wait for the HOA, you will be underwater." Leo joined me, his wagon full of pre-filled sandbags. We delivered flyers, talked to anyone who would listen. Some were concerned. Others sneered. Greg, the board member, met me on his walkway. "You're scaring people," he accused. "There's no official emergency declared." "Yet," I replied, "the water won't wait for the paperwork." He scoffed and went inside. That evening, Sarah posted an urgent HOA update. "Despite rumors, there is no cause for alarm. The board is monitoring the situation. Please do not spread unverified information that harms community morale." As if morale could hold back a river. That night, I checked the path again. Runoff was pooling in dips between the bricks. A planter had already tilted, its base eroded. I felt the ground shift under my feet. A crack had formed. The next day, the sky turned a deep, bruised purple. The rain didn't just fall, it descended. A thick, relentless deluge that turned lawns into bogs and streets into canals. I had already sealed everything, moved valuables upstairs, tested the generator. By 10 a.m., water was flowing over the brick path. I documented it, video, photos, and shared the link with every neighbor. Live evidence of systemic failure. HOA negligence in real time. At noon, Arthur sent an email. "Please refrain from unauthorized media sharing. The board is coordinating with the city on minor drainage issues." At 2 p.m., the first house flooded, 2 blocks east, where the path sloped into the lowest point. They'd ignored my flyers. Now they were in their garage, ankle deep, pushing water out with brooms. By 4 p.m., the southern street was submerged. My phone buzzed with messages, some from people who'd mocked me. By 6 p.m., board members started calling me. Arthur, Sarah, even Greg. I didn't answer immediately. I was checking the wall. The creek was a roaring, brown beast, but the barrier held. The water diverted around it, into the culvert I'd dug. The pressure was immense, but the design was sound. I finally answered Sarah's call. Her voice trembled. "David, we need help. The clubhouse is flooding. The lower lots. We didn't think." "I know you didn't," I said flatly. "What do we do?" I took a long breath. The dynamic had shifted. This wasn't about being right. It was about what happened next. Because the water didn't care who won the argument. It only cared who was ready. It wasn't the water that broke them first. It was the sound. The relentless drumming on roofs, the hiss in the gutters, the roar of a community failing under the weight of its own denial. By the second day, the HOA was in full panic. Emails flew every hour. Urgent. Use sandbags on ground floors. Emergency. Clubhouse basement full. Help. Greg's yard has collapsed. It was no longer about fines or aesthetics. It was about survival. And my home was still dry. I walked the inside of the wall. The creek was raging, but the barrier stood firm. The runoff basin was doing its job. Leo waved from his dry porch. "They're starting to understand," he shouted over the rain. "Starting to," I replied. Soon after, a knock. Sarah, drenched, mascara running, phone shaking in her hand. "We can't stop it," she whispered. "The clubhouse, the path, it's all underwater." "I'm sorry," she added. I let her in. My home was calm, warm, safe. The generator hummed. I gave her a towel. "Sit. Tell me." She did. 6 homes had water inside. 1 had foundation issues. The community pump had failed. The city lines were jammed. Arthur was at the clubhouse using trash bags as makeshift barriers. It was tragic. Leo came in. "It's exactly as you said," he noted. I nodded. We went out back. From the top of the wall, we saw the path was now a river, decorative lights floating away. Someone shouted in frustration. By sunset they came. First one, then a dozen neighbors, soaked, carrying belongings, pets. They weren't evacuating. They were retreating to the only high, dry ground, my house. Sarah helped me move furniture. Leo boiled water. I ran the generator. We made space upstairs. The living room became a camp of sleeping bags and quiet hope. I turned no one away, not even Greg. He arrived last, holding a waterlogged wedding photo. He looked at me, ashamed, and nodded. I nodded back. That night, as the wind howled, I sat by the window with an old field manual. I didn't need to read it. It was a reminder, preparation isn't paranoia. Outside, the wall held. Inside, regret had finally arrived. At 3 a.m., the wall shuddered, not a crack, but a deep vibration, like it had absorbed a massive blow. I was already in my boots, flashlight in hand. The rain had not ceased for over a day, and the creek was inches from the top, but it held. I went out into the cold, checking every inch. It was holding. Then I heard it, a crack from the direction of the community walkway, then a sound like a collapsing building, followed by a wave. I turned. A solar light flickered and died under a surge of black water. The brick path gave way, section by section, like dominoes falling. The sound was of structures failing. Leo was at my side. "It's gone," he said, "the whole thing." I shone my light downhill. In the low part of the neighborhood, where flood walls were banned, headlights were submerged in water. A living room was lit up, water pressing against the windows. We sounded the emergency horn. People stirred inside. Sarah came down pale. "What was that?" "The path collapsed. The southern drainage is gone. If they're still down there, they're trapped." I called 911 again. "Shelter in place if you are secure." We helped families move valuables higher. From the upstairs window, I saw the divide. My side, dry and safe, their side, chaos. The water had surged into the common areas, devouring the clubhouse parking lot. The very place they'd proudly remodeled. Gone. Sarah stood beside me. "That's Arthur's SUV." "I know." He was so sure. They always are, I said. She reached out and took my hand. It wasn't affection, it was acknowledgement. Her world of control and rules had been washed away. I squeezed her hand once. Help me wake the others. She nodded. By morning, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, exhausted. The sun tried to break through, casting a weak, apologetic light. We walked the wall again. The creek had dropped. But the water from the failed path had no escape. It sat, stagnant, reflecting the wreckage of suburban pride. People emerged from my home, blinking. A neighbor I barely knew said, "I should have built one too." Leo leaned on the wall. "They get it now." I looked at the destruction. "No," I said. "They don't get it yet." Then what's next? I glanced at Sarah, who was helping hand out food. Now we show them what getting it actually means. The water had changed everything. The morning after, I woke to quiet. The rain had stopped. Sunlight filled my kitchen. I made what coffee I had left and stepped outside. Our street was a mosaic of recovery, drying shoes, stacked sandbags, neighbors talking quietly. When I spoke, they listened. I walked the wall with volunteers. It was flawless. Carter joined me, toolbox in hand, a notebook filled with his documented failures. Paved trenches, missing maintenance, ignored alerts. "Send it to the city," I said. "I already did," he replied. We assigned roles. Leo led trench digging. I taught people to read elevation maps. Sarah organized supply deliveries. By sunset, we had a command center in the damaged clubhouse. A city engineer named Monica arrived, expecting chaos. She found an organized response team. I gave her a drive. "What's this?" "Everything they ignored and everything we fixed." She stared at me. "I'm recommending you for the Regional Resilience Committee." I didn't answer immediately. I was watching kids clear debris from the ruined path. There was poetry in that. "You should do it," Arthur said. "You're the only one who saw this coming." "I don't want to be in charge," I said. "Then advise us," Sarah said. "We're not going back." "I know," I said. "The water changed that. I just built the first thing it couldn't wash away." That night, we held a meeting in my front yard. Lawn chairs, blankets, shared food. I stood before them all. I told them about flood zones I'd seen fail, about the importance of being ready. I told them the truth I lived by. If you want to survive, you prepare. If you want others to survive with you, you lead. There was no applause, just quiet understanding. We voted unanimously to dissolve the HOA board and form a community safety committee. They asked me to lead it. I declined but agreed to teach. We called it the Preparedness Group. It met monthly. The city listened. FEMA gave a small grant. A newspaper ran a story, "The Barrier That Saved a Street." I hated the title. The barrier didn't save us, readiness did. And now, that readiness belonged to everyone. Spring arrived slowly, a season of healing. The HOA was officially dissolved after a city hearing filled with testimony about ignored warnings and misplaced priorities. Arthur stepped down, his apology letter appearing on the bulletin board. A leader who doesn't listen is a liability. I failed. I hope they listened to David. The wall remained, scarred but strong. People visited. A journalist did a story. I agreed, on the condition it was about preparedness, not me. Monica, the engineer, returned with blueprints. "I want to use your design elsewhere." I consulted quietly. Tomas and I held workshops. People came from other towns. We taught them to read maps, advocate with city code. They listened because the proof stood behind my house. The city rebuilt the clubhouse properly, with real drainage. They finally classified our area as a moderate flood risk. Mark, who once voted to fine me, helped install rain barrels. He planted a garden near the wall, calling it a living defense. Sarah started a resilience newsletter. The most unexpected change was Arthur. He moved away after his house was condemned. But before he left, he planted a tree at the neighborhood entrance. No fanfare. I sometimes water it. One morning, I found a laminated note on a branch. For every warning we laughed at. For every lesson the water taught. May we remember. I never said I wrote it. It wasn't about credit. It was about memory. The wall became part of our identity. Kids played by it. Teens painted a mural on it. Homes, a rising river, and a figure standing firm. It didn't look like me. It looked like anyone willing to stand up before the crisis hits. Life moved on. Our meetings were different. When someone brought up a trivial rule, another would gently say, "Let's focus on what matters." And we did. The grass grew back. The ruined path was left as a reminder of confusing beauty for strength. And my wall? It's still there. When I walk past it, I don't see concrete. I see a promise that no one here would ever be ignored again. If this story resonated with you, please support our channel by giving this video a like and subscribing to Winds of Thought for more tales of resilience.